What if I could give you a whole extra day in your week? What would you do with that time? Hey there, I'm Susan Bowles, and this is Beyond Margins, the show where we deconstruct how to engineer a calmer business. We're in the middle of a mini-series where we're exploring the common elements of calm businesses. So what makes a calm business actually calm? And how do you intentionally design and build for that? There are 8 elements that all calm companies have in common: clarity, autonomy, a lens of care, margins, efficient systems, rest, and reduced urgency. Now, we've talked about clarity, autonomy, and a lens of care in previous episodes in the series, so if you haven't listened to those, I highly recommend you go check them out. Today, we're tackling margins, and this is a topic that is near and dear to me. It's so important that I put it in the name of my business. When we think about margins, most frequently we think about profit margins, and then we kind of stop thinking about it. But we need to think beyond that. See what I did there? So you absolutely need profit margins to build a sustainable business. Let's be real, I'm a CFO, I'm not going to say otherwise. But that is a pretty limited perspective. The word margin just means space. And you need margins everywhere in your business, not just in your finances. You need to broaden how you're thinking about margin. So profit margins build financial space and longevity. Capacity margins allow you to have time to think, to lead, to breathe. Energetic margins mean that you can work consistently and sustainably without burning out. Emotional margins, they allow you to be there for yourself and for the community around you. And you need all of these and more. There's no area of your business where you couldn't build in just a little bit more space, because that's a big part of engineering something calmer. So think about it this way. If you operate at 100% or more all the time, you don't have any surge capacity. You can't handle anything unexpected, and the unexpected is inevitable. When you have spacious margins built into various aspects of your business, you are better equipped to absorb those surprises. So for example, if your schedule is jam-packed and you have to deal with, a sick kid, it can throw you off for weeks. But maybe you have a buffer day with no tasks or calls. If that's built into your schedule, you have a much easier time rescheduling or shifting things around. And that's because you built in some margin, some space for things to go unexpectedly. Likewise, if you're running your business right at your break-even point and you don't have any cash reserves set aside, and then your biggest client decides to leave, you're really up a creek. You don't have any financial margins to absorb that. Building that margin in gives you more breathing room to absorb losses like this. But margins aren't the default. The default is max capacity. So when you think about traditional work culture or business culture, the goal is to work harder, last longer, be more productive. It's all about cramming in as much work as we can. Everything is focused on being more efficient so that we can do more work. And that leads to workers that are exhausted, that are burnt out and unhappy. Nobody does their best work under those circumstances. But so many of the companies that we're told we're supposed to look up to have these kinds of cultures where you're expected to work 80 to 100 hours a week. Sure, they provide food and nap pods, which on the surface seems like it's to take care of their team. But in reality, it's just so that they can get folks to stay there and work more hours. The default business culture ignores that people are in fact people. Instead, it treats them like machines. So the only thing that matters is growth and productivity. And everything else is pretty much disregarded and ignored, even profit. So think about Silicon Valley culture, where the goal is move fast and break things. And the mentality is that you have to invest so that you can grow and grow and grow and grow. And the assumption is that profit or sustainability will just happen eventually. But we don't have time to worry about that now. So the default here is basically the opposite of building margins, and the default margins don't matter. But when you focus on building space, building margin into all those different areas of your business, it allows for a calmer environment, for better work, for a happier team. My guest today saw that firsthand when she transitioned her team to a 4-day workweek. Nathalie Lussier is an entrepreneur who has been making websites since she was 12. She was the founder and recently exited Access Ally, which is a digital course and membership platform. Before she exited the company, they went through the process of transitioning to a 4-day workweek. Now, on the whole, Western cultures are pretty much stuck on a 5-day, 40-hour-a-week work week. That is the default, and it's so ingrained that it's actually really tough to imagine other ways of working. But the data on 4-day work weeks is pretty good. The companies that have tried it see an increase in productivity and also employee happiness. And if you think about it, it totally makes sense because you are literally building more margin into your life. By going down to a 4-day work week, you're essentially creating an entire day to take care of yourself or anything that you need. Now, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors, but when we come back, Natalie and I are going to get into how she actually transitioned the company to the 4-day work week. So we're talking those nitty-gritty logistical details. So what went well, what didn't go well, and we'll talk about how that move to the 4-day work week impacted Natalie's ability to exit her company. So tell me a little bit about what was happening at Access Ally when you were thinking or considering making this transition to a 4-day work week. What was happening and kind of what was the impetus behind the shift?
Yeah. So a few years ago, we had decided that we wanted to just give everyone a Friday off, or like basically 4 Fridays off in the summer, just to as an experiment, just to see what would happen. It's summer. We moved back to Canada and it's a short season. So you want to take advantage and really get outside and enjoy the nice weather and all of that, go berry picking, all of those seasonal things. And so we said, okay, well, we think it'd be great just see if people like it, what happens to the business, what happens to everyone's productivity. And obviously everyone loved it. They all booked, slightly different Fridays and it worked. So we decided, okay, well, let's kind of keep experimenting. So what we ended up doing is that we decided to just go, everyone gets every other Friday off and everyone works a tiny bit more during the rest of the week. And so that wasn't a full 4-day work week. It was more of like another kind of schedule where like you still work 40 hours, but you get at least a Friday off, right? So every 2 weeks. So that also worked pretty good. Some people didn't want to do that. Some people preferred to just work every Friday and not work extra and just have a shorter day. So some people had that schedule and some people had the regular 5-day work week schedule. And so we did that for a while. And then a lot of research started coming up about 4-day work weeks. And it was actually the team that came to me and they were like, let's try this. We've already been kind of circling around doing something like this. So what do you think? And I was like, yeah, let's just do it. That's basically, it came from the team asking for it and us having experimented with something similar, but that wasn't quite a full 4-day work week before.
It makes sense that the evolution to the 4-day work week came from the team and trying it out, but why try it out at all? Like, why start experimenting with it?
Yeah, so obviously we're all human. And I think that we all have limits and capacities and things for doing work and also have, personal lives, families, pets, all kinds of things that we want to take care of outside of our regular work days. We just kind of realized, definitely around COVID times, people are burnt out and we didn't want to keep pushing people. We wanted people to recover, to feel good, to be able to come into work with energy and including ourselves. Because, as founders, sometimes we just push, and we never take time off. And what we found also for ourselves when we were experimenting with the different Fridays is that my husband and I would always work basically. So even though we had, people were off, half the team was off on one Friday, we would still be on just to cover, or if people had questions, we'd be there. And the same for the next Friday. So when we decided to do a 4-day work week, we were like, this will be a day where everyone's off. So we ourselves could also take that time off and recover and not be always on. As humans, we have to remember our limits and also think about like the holistic view, right? What are we really doing this for? And I think sometimes even as business owners, we get caught up into this whole thing of like, but this is my identity. This is my career. This is this thing that I've built and it's amazing. And at the same time, there's more to life than just work. So I think that all of those things together kind of helped us to realize like, yeah, like let's just try it. And, the results have been really amazing.
I think you bring up an interesting point because I have had this challenge as a business owner and a team leader as well, in that I am really good at giving my team members flexibility or letting them take the time off. And it seems a lot harder, I think, to do that for myself. As you mentioned, having some team members on, some team members off, and somebody has to always be around. Can you talk a little bit about how that felt for you and your husband, who is, for listeners, was also in the business?
I've taken like tons of training about, entrepreneurial time and management and productivity and all of that stuff. And a lot of times, they say founders need to take time off, they need to take weekends, they need to take free time where they're not thinking about their business. And I've done that and it was great. But also sometimes it feels like you should be working. It feels like there's just deadlines or there's, team stuff, or it could be customer stuff that you need to step in for. And so there's always this kind of pressure to be there, to be on, to answer just one more thing. And I think that when you create these boundaries for yourself where it's like, no, actually the business is closed right now, then you can't just, dive in for one more thing and I'll answer one more ticket. That is kind of the line that you can set for yourself. And I think that's what we kind of had to do because we just found ourselves like constantly having this push to work more. You think like, oh, well, I'm responsible for payroll and for everyone's well-being in the company. So if I don't show up and I don't work, then, things could go off the rails, right? So there's these little niggly thoughts in the back of your mind that that's going to happen. If you say, no, actually the business will be fine, the team will be fine, customers will be fine, you're able to rest and recover. And then when you do show back up on Monday, then you are refreshed, you have the energy and you're a lot more motivated to actually do the most important things and get those done and take care of business and all of that stuff that you need to do.
Yeah, I've definitely found the same. It's the hardest to like put that boundary in place, but really, really powerful in terms of building up energetic margin, having like the capacity to actually show up and do good work is so dependent on making sure you're building in enough rest into your overall work design, I guess. As you all were thinking about, we've experimented with 4 days in the summer and that's gone well, but now we want to try and implement this every Friday throughout the whole company. What were some of your biggest hesitations, your concerns, as you were kind of thinking, considering, planning for making the switch?
Yeah, so some of the big considerations was the support angle. So because we were a software company and we have people sending in support tickets 5 days a week, we were going to be closing on Fridays. And so that would leave like a 3-day period where if somebody had an issue, they'd be waiting for us to actually resolve it. And we also looked at our stats. So we looked at our data and we have much lower tickets that come in on Fridays. So we knew that people are already maybe taking their Fridays off or not tinkering with tech maybe on Fridays as much. So we knew logically it would probably be fine. And we did definitely have a little bit of stumbling blocks where we had holidays on Mondays. So there was like a 4-day gap. So we had to figure out some of those things of maybe on certain longer weekends, we would check in again one more time just to make sure there's nothing urgent, kind of put some systems like that in place. But yeah, overall, the biggest hurdles were the actual support side of things. And then also just making sure that we weren't overloading everyone with like the same amount of work that would have fit in 5 days. For us, that was just really prioritizing, making sure that we're really focusing on the most important projects or the most important types of things. We're working on a whole website redesign and things like that for our members area. We're going to do these workshops and all of this stuff. And we realized the amount of time to coordinate and invite guests and send reminders and all of that just didn't make sense with the amount of time that everyone had on the team to give to that project. So we decided to just scrap it and just keep going with office hours, which is what we had already been doing. So it kind of just helped us focus on the most important stuff and not spread ourselves too thin and try to jam pack, so much work into just 4 days. And then, yeah, I think some people on the team had some hesitations. So just talking about that with each person and just seeing, what were their hesitations. For some people, it was just, I want to make sure that, I can still deliver the same quality of work. Kind of each person had a slightly different reaction to it.
Interesting. So let's talk about the actual transition. As you were approaching kind of your transition date, how did you plan for, how did you prepare, communicate, actually making the switch?
Yeah, so we gave ourselves, I want to say like 3 weeks before we actually like implemented it. So I told everyone on the team, okay, we're going to do this. Here's the date that we're going to start. And then we looked at like our website, our communication, our autoresponders, all the stuff that people would get in touch with us through, like our contact page and all of that. Updated all of that to make it super clear our business hours are from, Monday to Thursday. And we also extended our business hours slightly during those 4 days. So we were able to do that because we had people in different time zones. We also wrote an email to our customers and obviously social media posts to make sure everyone saw it, because it did take a little while after we sent that post and those emails. Not everyone reads every email, right? So we also included it in our release emails after that, just to make sure that if anyone missed it, they would still be in the loop. I think we kind of covered all of our bases in terms of that communication side of things. Some of the people on our team had scheduling days that they could take calls on. So they just obviously removed those openings on their calendars and things like that. So just kind of making sure that all of our bases were covered.
And what was your strategy or approach for the actual 4 days? So, for some companies, when they move to a 4 day work week, it's 4 longer days, but only 4 days. And some just take the approach that we're working our same hours, we're just doing it 4 days, and we're just cutting out a day of essentially unnecessary work.
Yeah, so our approach was basically everyone was working 32 hours. So we're basically cutting off one day, keeping the same regular business hours that we had before. And the idea was this is like a raise, essentially, right? Because
Yep.
you're getting paid more per hour if you kind of break it down that way. So they're getting a day off, but they're still keeping their same salary. So we think it worked out really well that way. We were not trying to overload them because we had tested that with our every other Friday off method where we had increased the daily hours. There's just a limit to how much you can really work in a day. So I feel like if you're going to increase the length of the day to get a Friday off, it's great. It's like a trade off, but at the same time, you might not get that much more productivity out of it. So it's like we're just going to go for it by just cutting out that full day.
Yeah, I mean, especially with things like knowledge work, and I can do 4 hours, and that's about as much like legit, real work that like I need my brain
Yes,
on that I can
absolutely.
do in a day. Anything more than that is just diminishing returns.
That's exactly what we found too. Like there's some stuff you could do when you're like at half capacity, but in terms of, really good quality work, like there's no point forcing subpar work for an extra hour a day or something like that.
So, looking back on the transition now, talk to me about, what you think went well, what didn't go so well, what would you change, if anything, if you were going to do it again?
Yeah, so our worry about support was interesting because, like I mentioned, there were a few cases where something came in on a Friday, but it was a long weekend. So we had a couple of those kind of kerfuffle type situations, but we really learned from the one or two that we had, and we figured out, okay, well, we also have to communicate to people like, hey, if it's a Thursday before a really long weekend, we'll tell people we'll be back on Tuesday, and if it's not super urgent, then we know like that'll be the first one we tackle coming in on Tuesday. And if it is urgent, then yeah, maybe we will kind of check in on the weekend or see if we have a resolution for them. We also had people push back a little bit on us when we sent our communication out. So we had some of our customers respond to our email announcing the 4 day work week and saying, hey, that sounds great for you, but I think you should actually be going to 24/7 support as opposed to 4 days a week support. And other businesses are moving in that direction. And you should be too. I feel like that was almost like a cultural push where it was more of like, this is what you should do, as opposed to this is good for your team. At the same time, when they were telling us that, they were like, I'll be fine. Like, I don't need support all the time. So it's fine for me. But I really think you should be doing this. So I thought that was
That's
really
so
fascinating.
interesting that it wasn't a need for them. It was just their opinion about what you should do with your business. So, did you respond to them?
Yes, we definitely responded to every person who sent back any comments or any feedback or anything like that for sure. We're a very small company, and doing 24/7 support would be kind of ridiculous, or even 7 days a week support would be really hard for our team because all of our team members, they have families, they have all these things going on. So I feel like it didn't quite make sense for us to do that. But we explained all of those things too. And we definitely had people also who were excited and they were like, hey, that's awesome. I hope more companies do this.
The cultural feelings about the 5 day, 40-hour work week is so fascinating when you start pushing up against the does this actually make sense? What's actually good for the team, the employees, the company, and honestly, even, the clients and customers. You did this and didn't really, it seems like, notice any negative impacts from the client side. It's so interesting how passionate people are about 5-day work weeks.
It's very true. And the 5-day work week is still relatively recent. It's really up to us how we want to structure our time, and businesses have changed and evolved over the years. So I feel like at this moment, it's kind of the 5-day work week is set in stone, but I don't think it's going to be like that forever. As the trailblazers, we have to be the ones who decide what makes sense for our teams, for ourselves, and for our customers. I really feel like also the support and the focus that we brought to our customers was better because we weren't so burnt out. I have the energy, I have the capacity, I have the fuel and the passion to do that. And I think that came because people were excited to have those long weekends and be able to come back refreshed.
That is so powerful and yet so underestimated when we're talking about allowing for rest and building in margin to everybody's kind of capacity areas. It's so underrated how impactful just increasing the rest a little bit can recharge people and bring them back into doing some really good, really impactful work. And I think that's the part that frequently is missed in that 5-day work week. Most of us can do about 4 hours of thoughtful work a day, and we're doing so much more than that. It's just constantly creating that burnout. And the impact to that is lower quality work, but it's taking a long time to do it.
Exactly. If you feel stretched time wise, like you don't have time to schedule like personal appointments or like things for your health and things like that, we definitely had a lot of team members who used those Fridays to catch up on going to the dentist and the doctor and like all these things that they hadn't done for a while just because life gets busy and you feel like kind of how we feel as entrepreneurs of like you have to be at work, right? So even though they have days off, they want to use those to travel or to visit family or to do certain things. And then they kind of neglect their own personal well being or upkeeping. We saw a lot of our team members scheduling those personal type things on those Fridays a lot afterwards. And I was like, oh, wow, like that makes such a big difference. And everyone can take care of themselves the way that they should be.
That's amazing. Do you think the switch to the 4-day did actually create more space for you, for the team?
Yeah, I definitely think it created more space and more creativity and better discussions as well. I feel like people would have, more creative ideas and show up with, hey, we should try this or maybe we should change this. I feel like that kind of thing was possible because we came back refreshed. Also, I feel like interpersonally, everyone on the team was really more cohesive and the communication kind of improved. If you can always get in touch with people, it doesn't really matter when you do it, then like, okay, make it happen when it needs to happen. But we kind of got a little bit more efficient with our communication where it would be like, okay, so we have a random Slack channel, we had our general and like some other specific channels. But also if we had to have a call or do something, we knew like, okay, there's only 4 days to work. So I don't want to disturb that and have a huge meeting with everyone if I don't need everyone. Like we kind of honed in on our communication a little bit more. So we consolidated some of those calls and, what we need to do to communicate better. So I feel like that also helped a lot where it's like maybe we were wasting some of that communication time before, but now we had to be a little bit tighter with some of that and just be more efficient essentially.
For a lot of us, I think we let things expand to fill the time that we have. If you have an extra day, essentially, that you don't really have the work to necessarily fill, or you're trying to fill time when you are too tired to do real work, that communication does kind of tend to get lazy. And I think frequently we use meetings as a way to communicate lazily, where when we're communicating asynchronously or we are proactively communicating, we save a whole bunch of time that we don't have to be in meetings. But I do think you're right. At least that's what I found in my work as well, that communicating asynchronously can actually be a better form of communication in a lot of instances versus meetings, which are just easy to be like, oh, we have to talk about something. Let's have a meeting.
Exactly. There's different personalities on the team too. Some people love having meetings and are more extroverted and want to chat. And other people are like, I have really to focus, like the developers on the team, like they need their super focused time to code. And so for them, having a lot of meetings can be kind of trickier. Obviously, we have our general meetings for the whole team, and then we have sub meetings for specific topics. And so that really helped us to make sure that we're only having the right people in the meetings.
It seems like you maybe eliminated some meetings or unnecessary live communication. Was there anything else that you found that you kind of just stopped doing because you didn't really have the time, or it wasn't worth the time to use during those 4 days?
Well, we definitely got more efficient with things like editing podcasts and having transcriptions done and things like that. So we found tools and other ways to kind of improve our processes. And we were hiring a lot of paid interns. So there's a lot of work around hiring paid interns that has to happen on a regular basis. So for the time being, we'll take a break on hiring new interns and just focus on what we have on our plate. So we kind of made some changes like that. It doesn't mean that we weren't going to go back to hiring interns and things like that, but just realizing like for the season that we were in that transition, especially, we didn't want to add big projects. For example, hiring an intern, we would have to look at like hundreds of resumes and then do interviews. That can take up like several weeks of time. And so we realized like, okay, no, we need to pare that back a little bit. So yeah, there was things like that where it made sense to do it this way. And we did have paid interns again after, but just really getting really clear on what our priorities were for that transition period was important.
And was there anything that you noticed help you become more efficient that made the transition to 4 days? Because essentially you're really trying to eliminate a whole day's worth of work somehow, whether that's because it's not useful time spent, but essentially if you're going to keep doing it, you have to eliminate a day's worth of work. What tools or resources or projects did you do that helped you actually do that?
We always were big fans of quarterly planning. So we were doing our quarterly plans, and you know how you might have boulders and rocks and stones and the smaller pebbles. So we kind of realized like realistically we can't fit as many things on our quarterly plan as what we would have done in the past. And to be honest, I feel like we always overstuff our quarterly plans anyways, but I feel like that really helped us like looking at how big is each project and how big is each pebble and realizing like realistically how many days would this take. And so that kind of helped us prioritize and cut the fluff a little bit of what we were planning to do or things that sounded good. And so just kind of honing in on like what are the actual things that we need to focus on.
As you were eliminating things from your quarterly plan, did you notice that you ended up having to either reposition, reprioritize projects that really were real projects that you really did want to do, that you had to slow the timeline down on or reprioritize? And how did you approach that?
Yeah, so I think on the software development side, that definitely happened because there's a limit to how much time our developers have. Obviously, they're still going to need to communicate with the team. So we're not reducing too much on that side of things. There's always tons of feature requests. I think we had 200 or 300 feature requests at all times. There's always things that we could be working on or could be developing on the software side. So for us, we decided to just really prioritize the things that really matter. And so we had a couple of different ways of categorizing feature requests. So we would look at, is this something that impacts people's ability to make money? So because Access Ally helps people sell their courses, their memberships and coaching and things like that, if it was, say, part of the shopping cart and it could improve sales for them, then that's something that we would prioritize a little bit higher, or something like that, that would be sort of a showstopper for people in running their businesses. Those tend to be the things that we prioritize the most. And then from there, other features that people are asking for a lot. So like the more people ask for it, the higher up it goes on our priority list. And we have like a little ClickUp system that basically like calculates 10 people have asked for this, 5 people have asked for that. This one's easier to do and that one's harder to do. So we can kind of like get a number at the end of the day that says, if you do this one, it'll help X number of people, plus you can do it faster. So just get that one done first. At the end of the day, we were probably releasing a little bit slower than we would have if we were working 5 days a week. But at the same time, it's more sustainable. So our team can actually keep showing up every week, right? And not be like, I'm burnt out. So tortoise versus the hare, right? We can just slow and steady do it and get the work done, do it great, or try to rush and then feel stressed and burnt out and kind of flame out.
With my clients, and honestly with me personally, one of the things that I have found to be kind of one of the hardest things in transitioning to more sustainable work or to calmer work tends to be that feeling of urgency, that feeling that things are important and they must happen now, and deconstructing the fact that most urgency is made up. How did you approach that? Because I know it's been something that you focus on as well. And it seems like this whole 4-day workweek project is an exercise in training yourself to be okay with things going a little bit slower.
As an entrepreneur, I've definitely had like this quick start, like things have to move quickly. I need to see results fast. And my husband is sort of the opposite, where he's more of the thinking long term, thinking in the next 10 years, 20 years, like where is it going? He was really like my balancing person, I would say. And he's taught me so much about slowing down and being comfortable with the results and the pace that I'm at right now. And I think that we could all use a little bit more of that if we have that kind of go, go, go. Like that 4-day work week is an exercise, exactly like you said, to pace ourselves, slow down, and do the important work, do it well, and then trust that the results will come, even though it might not be the next day. We're all probably relearning and rewiring ourselves to be at that comfortable pace, if you will. And I think part of that also is just like knowing what enough looks like. A lot of times, we want more, faster, bigger, more growth, more, more whatever metrics you're going after, right? And I think that knowing what enough looks like so that, your business is paying you, paying your team, maybe it has a nice profit, but it doesn't have to constantly be like doubling, tripling, and doing all these like crazy growth metrics every year or every month or quarter or whatever it is that you're tracking. And I think that is huge right there, because that's sort of unhooking from this culture that we have to keep going faster and bigger and more growth and all of that. So I think over time, you kind of sort of gently learn how to let go.
You moved to a farm, which is a relatively different pace of life than a city. And I did something similar. We moved to the middle of nowhere up in the mountains in Colorado. Do you think that physical kind of reminder about how nature paces you? Like, I have noticed that here, where there are more seasons and just the pace of life is slower by just because it's harder to do things, has helped me unpack a little bit of that need for urgency. And I'm curious if you found something similar as you've transitioned to life on the farm.
I think you're spot on. Yeah. Cause, I used to live in Toronto, New York City, and then we moved to Texas, which was a little bit slower paced, and then to the farm, which is way slower paced. And I think, there's definitely something to it. It's not that you're not doing anything, because I think there's daily chores, there's daily things are always happening in your business, in your life. It's not like there's no movement, but it might not be the big splashy things that you think should be happening, but they are slowly happening over time, and the timelines might not be what you expect. So I like thinking about trees, and there are timelines that are super long. A short-lived tree is like 50 years, and like most trees live like hundreds and hundreds of years. If you just planted a tree, yes, you want fruit next year, but it's probably not going to be ready then. So you have to really be patient and think about those expectations that you set for yourself. That pace of life on the farm changes how you think about things, and also the timelines, I think, are really different too.
I have started to move more towards just thinking about my business in terms of seasons or in terms of much bigger blocks of time than I thought about it when I started my business. When you start your business, you want things to happen right now. The longer I do this, the more patient I get, the more comfortable I get with things just taking kind of a while. It's a more realistic expectation, but trying to align my expectation with reality. Having that gap was so much more of a challenge at the beginning. And the longer you do something, the more you realize things just take time. You have to be able to show up saying and doing the same thing over a longer period of time and getting more comfortable with things kind of being boring, and that's okay and kind of the goal.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that. And there's a book called 40 Chances It's a farming book, which I actually have not read it, but I read a review and I was like, oh, that's a brilliant idea. But basically, this concept that most farmers will have about 40 years of farming in their lifetimes to try different things. So each season you get another shot. Basically, you get another year to try to plant things. And so you can try a different method or improve something that worked last year, but now you want to try slightly better. And I feel like maybe that applies to entrepreneurship too. Maybe 40 years of work, approximately, like you have 40 chances of each year to try something different, improve what you have going. And that timeline of 40 years changes how you think about things a lot.
Now I have to go read farming books because that sounds super interesting. So, is there anything you think we should touch on or talk about that we haven't yet?
When I was looking to sell Access Ally, the business, I wanted people who were buying it to keep the 4-day work week. And there was definitely a lot of pushback around that too. So I think that's something to think about depending on what your exit strategy might be for your business. Or it is nice to have that long term view for yourself as running the business. But if you ever decide to step out of the business, what are the plans for either transitioning back to a 5-day work week or negotiating that into a deal as well?
That is so interesting and something I hadn't even considered. Tell me a little bit more about how you handled that in terms of negotiations or finding a buyer.
Basically, it depends on the market, how marketable your business is, who your potential acquirers are, like what their cultures are like as well. For us, we didn't have a whole ton of people that we approached. The WordPress space is kind of I want to say like an insular community. There's not a ton of people who are buying WordPress businesses. We knew kind of going in, like we may need to negotiate that. We might not be able to negotiate keeping the 4-day work week. We ended up going with the buyer that was most aligned with our values and had the most experience in our space. We didn't actually get to keep the 4-day work week when we sold. So that's something that I want to mention, which was
Interesting.
also a tough transition for the rest of the team as well, including my husband, who's still working for the company.
When you were considering selling, was that something that was kind of always on your radar or something that you had a buyer come in and offer to purchase and you were like, hadn't really thought about it, but that sounds okay?
Yeah. So for many, many years, I've had people approaching us saying, like, hey, we want to purchase your company. Pretty much every single person, I was like, no, 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 I don't want to sell. This is not a good fit. I don't think this is going to work. There were a couple of people who were interesting over the years, and we definitely explored a little bit more. And then for whatever reason, the deals kind of didn't go through. But then more recently, when I decided, okay, I think I'm starting to get ready to let go of this. My kids are getting a little bit older and I want to spend a little more time with them. And obviously the farm and all of things are kind of keeping me really busy. And I was like, okay, I had been approached by the buyer who ended up buying us. And I was like, okay, maybe. So I kind of put them off. And I basically said, like, okay, in a few months, maybe we'll circle back. And I really got clear on whether or not I wanted to sell and did it make sense to do it now. And had a discussion with my husband, Robin, and figured that, yeah, I think maybe we should consider this. And then I decided to, if we were going to actually do it, I should approach other potential buyers too, because if we're just going to do it, like, let's see what the interest is. And so I did approach a couple of other companies too and had discussions with them too. And then I ended up going with the person who had originally gotten in touch with us. And also, I wanted to make sure that they kept everyone on the team. Everything kind of kept going as much as possible. So the 4-day work week was one of the things that didn't make it, but most of the rest of our systems and things kept going. And I have a feeling like the team may convince them to go back to a 4-day work week because it really worked well for us.
Just the concept of a 4-day work week, I think, is in such contradiction to what we, at least in the Western part of the world, see as the default. And sometimes I think it's really hard to envision that anything else could work outside of what currently works. Like we assume that what is the default, there's a reason behind it. And I'm not sure that there always is.
And you mentioned kind of this part of the world. So my husband Robin is from China, so we keep up on what's happening in China a little bit. And over there, there's a schedule called 996, which basically means you work from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. So that is sort of like their corporate schedule. And when you think about that, you're like, what? That is ridiculous. Who does that? And how could they survive that way? And yeah, a lot of people get super burnt out, and it's not good. So I think we can look at other cultures and see like, okay, they're taking it in another direction and that's not going well. And so maybe we shouldn't like keep going in this direction, right? We should go in the opposite direction and do something that's a little bit better for everyone.
Yeah, that's totally in the opposite direction from where a lot of companies are trying to head right now. And it's really interesting post the COVID work revolution, I guess, all of the impact of so many companies transitioning to working from home and then transitioning some back to hybrid or back to the office. It's been really interesting to watch just what's happening around work culturally and what's working and what's not really working.
Yeah. And like what we're willing to say yes to and what we think maybe should change. We have that power. And especially as business owners, we have the flexibility to be like, hey, I'm going to try an experiment. And, you can tell people like how we did it in the beginning. We're just going to try this for the summer. We're going to just try this and see what happens. And, look at the results, because I think the results speak for themselves once you start doing it.
Comfortable margins are the cornerstone of any calm business. Without margins in the different areas of your business, it's unlikely it'll ever feel truly calm. And remember that you need to think beyond just profit margins when we're thinking about this. So consider your capacity and your time margins. Think about what gives you energy or takes it away. Examine what's taking up your emotional bandwidth. So are you a caregiver, or someone who maybe doesn't handle big emotions particularly well, or you have some kind of crisis happening in your life? You might need to think about that and focus on building more emotional margin right now. Margins really just mean space. And more space means less urgency, fewer emergencies, and a better ability to respond to surges. And that means that it's calmer. Thanks to everyone who supports Beyond Margins. If you're a listener, a sponsor, or a partner of any kind, I couldn't do this show without you. If you're interested on learning more about how to build a calmer business with comfortable margins, head to beyondmargins.com. While you're there, you can sign up for my free newsletter. I send it every week, and it's all about exploring one thing. How do you engineer a calmer business? Until next time, stay calm.